Here is a motion picture film. Let's tidy up this tangle of film by putting it on a reel.
Hello, listeners. My name's David Seeley, and this is Film Swap. We really appreciate you coming to this part of town tonight because we know you don't usually come down this way. We're going to go on into the cinema now and meet a couple of friends of mine. But you may notice that your feet might stick a little bit to the floor, and you might notice some odd stains on the seats, and some, they might be a little bit broken. And that guy, don't worry about that guy sitting in the third row in the trench coat. You can't quite tell what he's doing with his hands, but just ignore him and try and settle in and enjoy the films tonight. Because tonight we're taking a little walk down to the more seedy side of cinema, and we're going down to the bygone era of the Grindhouse, and we're going to do it with these two dodgy-looking gentlemen right here. We've got my co-host, the ecstatic gaucho himself, Mr. Jonathan Pritchard Barrett.
Cheers.
And tonight we've got a very, very special guest all the way from Winnipeg in Manitoba, Canada. And he's a podcast veteran and a aficionado and collector of all things genre cinema. So I'd like you all to welcome Mr. Richard Doyle.
Hey.
Richard, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Yeah. Winnipeg's a great city. My oldest son lives in Winnipeg, and I've been there many, many times. Usually when it's either very extreme weather, it's like either like sort of like absolutely roasting hot, or when it's like sort of minus 40 in the wintertime. So it sounds like it's not quite like that now. You're just getting into autumn.
It's very autumnal and rainy from last week.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for joining us today down in the Grindhouse. We're going to have a little bit of fun tonight and talk about Grindhouse films it's not a genre of film. It's actually was a type of cinema, wasn't it? Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the Grindhouse?
Sure. It's sort of a phenomenon mostly of the 60s and 70s when inner city theaters that were aging sort of kept themselves alive with often double and triple bills, sometimes 24 hours a day of sort of cheap, exciting genre films of various sorts, everything from foreign imports like martial arts films and Italian horror and thrillers to straight up pornography at times, or action films, Blaxploitation films, stuff like that. And, largely started dying off in the 80s when theaters started dying off.
Mm. And it runs quite parallel, doesn't it, with kind of drive-in cinemas as well. I think they had quite a similar sort of types of films and things that they used to show in the smaller kind of independent sort of drive-in cinemas, and things would book a lot of these same kind of films. And mainly they would be kind of cheap and dirty. I don't know where the term Grindhouse, there's a lot of sort of different views on where the term Grindhouse came from, whether it's just the fact that the films themselves were grinded out very cheaply and quickly, or just the fact that the theaters themselves used to grind sort of 3-4 films a night. And these were cinemas that people, whenever you see in films where they have people who are on the lam and they're trying to hide, and they'll pay a couple of dollars and go into a cinema and sit there, that would be the kind of thing. It would be like these all-night cinemas that would just be showing these, lots of violence and sex and sort of kung fu and gory,
Oh,
knife-wielding maniacs, and all sorts of fun things like that.
but the house part of it must come from a sort of like an alternative or sort of opposite of art house.
Mm.
That's what I assume somehow.
Yeah, no, well, that absolutely makes sense. Yeah, yeah.
It's sort of art house's sort of cousin, sort of bad cousin.
Well, and I've read somewhere too that said that there was the term sort of bump and grind places where they used to have like the sort of the burlesque houses with, the strippers and things, and that it might have been sort of an offshoot of that, because I think a lot of early exploitation films were things like that, like the what did they used to call them, the nudies, and the nudie quickies and stuff like that, which were just basically filmed kind of burlesque acts and things like that. So that might be somewhat where the term came from as well.
It would have been the
Yeah,
same area of town too, but like the
yeah,
theaters would be in the same area of town that strip clubs were in and stuff.
yeah, absolutely. It would always be down, and I guess the most famous one was in it was 42nd Street in New York, wasn't it? Where
Hmm.
during that time period of, as you said, like the 60s and 70s, they had a lot of sort of really, small, kind of cheap independent cinemas that showed a lot of these kind of films. And I think they would show mainstream films as well, wouldn't they? But they might be kind of second run. They might get them after they'd finished their wide release. So they might get, the odd Charles Bronson movie or something like that in to sort of put on the marquee, and then they'd have the sort of the filler things. There'd be a lot of biker gangs and things like that as well. That seemed to be quite a popular genre, things like that. Um,
I
Go
think,
ahead, John.
John, that Grindhouse didn't make it to the other side of the pond
Yeah,
because I guess it was sort of different. There was flea pits here, which were a bit sort of smaller cinemas in,
yeah.
like in what do you call it? The greatest show, the smallest show on earth.
Small Show on Earth that we talked about a little while back,
Yeah,
with Amelia Eckler. Yeah, that was the kind of thing they would have in England, and I suppose they would show a lot of things like that's where the Hammer films and
yeah.
things like that would come in.
But they were sort of smaller rather than sort of the big these because these Grindhouse ones were these giant cinemas, weren't they? Sort of, 2,000-3,000 people in. Whereas the sort of flea pit was a sort of smaller business altogether.
Hmm.
Anyway,
Well, tonight we thought it'd be fun to kind of explore that side of cinema. It's a bit different from sort of the mainstream kind of Hollywood studio fare, because it was all mainly independent producers, and a lot of first time directors and things cut their teeth and making these kind of films. And I think there's a lot of quite famous directors kind of went on from, they kind of made their start. People like Brian De Palma would be a good example, and maybe one or two others like Toby Hooper and people like that who excuse me, who would have sort of made these small independent films. And then, sorry, Wes Craven was another one I was thinking of. We made that what is it, The Last House on the Left, is that what it's called? Which
Yeah.
is quite an unpleasant sort of viewing experience, but it was quite financially successful, probably for that reason, because it was the kind of thing that got a lot of notoriety and sort of drew people into the cinemas to see what all the fuss was about. And he, of course, then went on to have a career in more mainstream films. He was the Nightmare on Elm Street guy, wasn't he, Richard?
Yeah,
I
it
think.
was. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So
Scream eventually.
yeah, yeah. So yeah. So anyway, we've picked a couple films tonight to talk about. Jonathan, I don't know if you want to, because we have a guest on. We just agreed a film between us to put forward tonight, and which isn't always an easy process, is it, Jonathan? Because
no,
we have to agree on a film, and then we also have to make sure that here in the UK that you can actually watch it. We have access to it somehow so that we can see it. So we kind of drew up a short list and then sort of looked to see what was available, and then we agreed on something. So, Jono, do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about what you picked tonight?
The film I picked is Suspiria, which is came out. It was released in 1977, and it's directed by Dario Argento. Basically, it's an Italian film, horror film, and it is of the giallo genre. When giallo is basically a sort of uniquely Italian take on horror. I guess it's sort of similar to Hammer. It's like a sort of, similar in a sense. It's sort of Italian, distinct. I mean, like Hammer is very British horror, and giallo is very Italian horror, and they share certain sort of similarities, I suppose. But sort of they're churning them out. They're sort of relatively low budget, and probably there's a few other similarities as well. Anyway, Dario Argento is like this. He was, I think, the master of giallo, and this is, I think, generally regarded as his best film. It's his best known film, and it was remade. It's even been remade. And so it's really a sort of embodiment of a whole sort of section of the Grindhouse, which is the horror part of it. And it's a terrific movie in many, many ways. That's my film.
Brilliant. Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about that in a few minutes. But Richard, you also selected a film for a swap tonight from the Grindhouse era. So can you tell us a bit about what you picked tonight?
I picked, to go far away from horror, I picked Dolemite, sort of kind of a Blaxploitation film as well as kind of a comedy, a little, and one of these films that is sort of the unique expression of a particular person, as in Rudy Ray Moore, who stars in Dolemite and is largely the impresario behind the whole enterprise, paid for the film himself. It's a character. He was a nightclub comedian, and it's the character he did in his nightclub act and on records that is a pimp that also has a nightclub act where he does comedic poems, which is a very unique idea for a movie. Not a particularly well put together film, but I think like an immensely enjoyable one.
Well put.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of those. I mean, it's kind of fair to say in a sense because of some of the technical limitations and some of the performances and stuff. You could kind of argue that this kind of falls into the sort of so bad it's good kind of category, and the fact that it is kind of you could make the argument that technically in things it's not a good film, but it's an immensely entertaining film, partly because of that. Sort of its limitations are its strengths, and it's incredibly funny and fun to watch. So it's a great film, and there's lots to pick apart in it as well. So I think, shall we get down to it? I think we're going to start with Suspiria first. So listeners, we're going to take just a few seconds break so we can tell you a little bit about our social media stuff. And so listen very carefully, because I'm sure you're going to find that incredibly interesting and want to check those things out after you listen to the show. And then after that, we'll be back and we're going to talk a little bit more about Dario Argento's 1977 horror classic called Suspiria. So we'll see you in just a second.
You can follow the Film Swap on social media. We're on Twitter and TikTok at FilmSwap UK, on Instagram at FilmSwap Media, and on YouTube at FilmSwap_podcast, and at Facebook at FilmSwap the Podcast.
And we're back. Listeners, welcome back. And Richard and Jonathan, welcome back. One thing that probably didn't get mentioned in that little message is about our new website. It's really easy to remember. It's filmswap.uk. So you might want to go and check that out as well to find out Film Swap stuff. So you can go there, and all the latest episode will be there, and links to all of the various episodes and things like that. And you can even get fashions. So you can get really cool sort of Film Swap merch, swag, Film Swap swag. So I know Christmas is coming up, so folks, you're probably going to want to start thinking about getting your friends really cool Film Swap T-shirts and ball caps and things. So go and check that out, because you'll be helping us out, and you'll be like the coolest people in town if you're wearing that kind of stuff. So there we go. On that note, let's talk about some cool films, shall we? We're going to start today with Suspiria, one of our Grindhouse greats. So Jonathan, do you want to tell us a little bit about Suspiria?
So yes, Suspiria. To give you a sort of synopsis, it stars Jessica Harper, and so she is visiting Europe, and she's come to study dance in Germany. Even though it's an Italian film, she's come to Germany, to the Tanz Academy in Freiburg, in Germany, and so this sort of dance academy is this sort of extraordinary, sort of gothic but very lurid, sort of extraordinary design. And she turns up, and it's all very weird from the very first moment she gets there. This one student runs off. She goes in, or tries to go in, and then somebody else runs out. And anyway, then she
kind of speaking gobbledygook as well, isn't she? When she comes out, she's sort of like talking in this sort of making very strange comments to somebody off screen, and then she runs off.
And in classic sort of horror film ghost story style, it's in a dark and stormy night. There's a sort of thunderstorm.
Very much so. Yes, the rain is very, very, monsoon-like, isn't it?
It's very monsoon-like, yeah. And so she basically stays at this dance academy, but she realizes, begins to realize that all is not what it appears, and it's there's something going on, and there's horror, basically.
Yes.
It's a great film. It also has music by a Italian prog band, electro prog band called Goblin, who worked closely with the director Dario Argento, and it's quite a film. I would highly recommend watching it.
Absolutely. Sorry, so Richard, what are your thoughts on Suspiria?
This film, it just grabs you from the throat on the first few minutes of it, with her airport arrival, and the airport is bathed in red glowing light, and the goblin music is pounding away, and even the sliding glass door as she exits makes a loud ka-thunk sound. And it's a film. I don't think it really lets up to any degree. It's sort of a waking nightmare of a film with some really extraordinary sequences that I don't think make much sense in any way. But it's almost a virtue that this film doesn't make much sense in the long run. I think it's sort of I think it's his sixth film at this point, and he was getting increasingly more stylish, and he seems to have put all of his resources on the table here. All the delirious color and the Goblin's incredible soundtrack. It's sort of as close as you get to a total experience as a horror film.
Yeah. And I guess one thing that sort of distinguishes it from some horror films, there's sort of not much of an element of realism. Because especially sort of American horror films, the sort of realism sort of draws you in. You think, well, this could be me stuck in a, wherever it is. But in this one, it's just you're in a fictional world from the very beginning. And those colors. The color is one of the most striking things about it. This extraordinary lurid color. Red plays a massive role in it. There's red lights, there's red paint, everything's painted, not everything, lots of red paint used. The blood is not a realistic blood whenever there's blood. It's sort of very artificial red, and absolutely terrific.
Yeah, the dream, Richard, when he said about it being a dream, it does have very much that feeling of being like a dream, like a nightmare all the way through, and just even the sort of the quick cuts and the little details that get brought in all the time, sort of make it always kind of keep you slightly sort of disoriented almost in a sense, doesn't it? Sometimes, and it's and yeah, the colors. I mean, the budget, the gel budget on this must have been extraordinary because they at times like there's all these different colors and they're so vivid and so striking and so expression of what's the word,
Impressionistic.
expressionist, like in terms of how they convey the moods and the style of it. So it's really quite amazing.
One of my favorite lighting moments in that is after you have the scene where it rains maggots from the ceiling on all the students.
Yes.
And we cut to them in the makeshift little dormitory that they put up in like one of the dance gymnasiums.
Mm.
Yeah.
There's a sheet around them and everything looks quite normal. They turn the lights out and everything behind the sheet is bathed in red light, which
Yeah.
is like totally nonsensical in one sense, but it's so delightfully atmospheric.
Yeah, it's theatre. It's basically
Yeah.
not. It's not. You don't think this isn't realistic. It's just it looks good. Basically, it's
Yeah.
pure
Yes.
style.
Yeah. Very much so. And the sound design as well, I think, plays a pivotal role in it because there's all this sort of creepy in that scene that you mentioned, Richard. There's there's a woman sleeping behind this sheet, and she's making this really weird kind of wheezing sort of snore, but not a snore. It's just like this really creepy kind of sort of breathing sound that she's making. And there's lots of that all the way through it. The sound design is quite amazing. And the music to that Goblin soundtrack. I mean, it really struck me too watching it today because I watched it just this morning. Um, and the stereo separation on the soundtrack is quite striking because usually even when you watch sort of big Hollywood blockbuster movies and they have the surround sound and everything, it's just usually just explosions and everything's fairly more discreet. But this film has really quite striking separation between the sound channels. So quite often the music is quite striking because you really get that spatial effect when you're watching it. So that's something that struck me this time watching it.
I guess that's a part of the sort of psychedelic influence, maybe from the sort
Yeah,
of 60s, 70s. Like it makes me think of Pink Floyd and how they had their quadraphonic accelerator, this sort of joystick that could sort of move sound around the auditorium.
yeah,
Sort of similar because they were a band. They played concerts, the Goblin. So
mm,
it's not just that they did. It was a sort of it's not just a pure soundtrack. It's sort of slightly it works as in both
mm.
ways.
Apparently, the visuals were very much inspired by Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. I was reading. Apparently, that was kind of the look that Argento wanted in the piece. Like he picked the cinematographer. I think this is the first time he'd worked with him. And sorry, let me just look up his name quickly. Luciano Tavoli. And apparently, this was their first film together. Although he subsequently worked with him again, but apparently he picked him because he'd did some test footage that he'd seen, and it caught that Snow White and the Seven Dwarves look, and that of the really vivid reds and greens and things. So he immediately said, "I want this guy. I want him to come and shoot this film for me."
Mm.
Um, so it's amazing.
It is a real new element, sort of in Argento. At starting with this film, it does feel sort of fairy tale influence too, uh, in that regard. And he does a few more films. I think Phenomena that he does in the '80s feels very much like a fairy tale too, and it's a big shift in him from the pure sort of murder mystery giallo stuff he was doing.
Right.
Mm.
Well, the fact that it's set in Germany, so it takes it into the territory of Grimm's fairy tales. If it had been
Yeah.
in Italy, I don't know. I mean, it's not. I guess there's fairy tales there, but it's not quite as grim with two M's.
Mm.
Yeah.
There's a bit of an Alice in Wonderland kind of feel to it as well, isn't there? Because Jessica Harper's character, she seems like she's kind of a fairly naive, innocent young girl who goes into this, sort of descends into this, incredible environment with all these weird sort of things going on and these vivid images and things. So there is a little bit of a sense of that as well, of her going down the rabbit hole, if you will, into this kind of this other world.
The sets are extraordinary. This sort of the dance school has this banister going up the stairs that looks like either snakes or sort of intestines. I'm not sure what it is, but these sort of tubular things intertwining, and the colours. There's no sort of pale colour. They're all very, very bold, and the sort of wallpaper. I don't know. The wallpaper looks like sort of snake skin, and just the windows are strange. Everything is unusual and sort of unnerving.
Mm,
That's another fantastic element. And yeah, the people who run the school are really sort of great gothic characters. They're sort of strange, domineering, maybe slightly Nazi. I don't know. They've got that sort of
yeah.
overtones of that, and yeah,
Well, the head teacher is quite amazing, isn't she? She's just so stern and sort of unpleasant, sort of right from the get-go as soon as she comes in the door. And I love the bit when they kind of, when the American lady who's sort of, I guess, running the school, and they imply that she was some previously a famous ballerina. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the actor who was
Joan
playing
Bennett.
it.
It's
Who was
Joan
it?
Bennett.
It
Joan
was, sorry?
Bennett. Joan
Joan
Bennett.
Bennett.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah,
But
she was
she,
back with them.
I
Playing.
love that when she kind of says that they say, "Oh, well, your room's ready and you can stay here," and she kind of goes, "Oh, no, I want to stay at this other lady's apartment. I'm happy there." And so then they orchestrate this thing, so she ends up having to stay there. So that's all like this kind of manipulative, sort of kind of creepy manipulation that goes on to sort of keep them. It's very, just if we talk about this story for a moment, because what I don't really understand about, and again, we try and avoid spoilers here for people who haven't watched the film. We don't want to sort of give too much of the game away so they can enjoy it when they see it. But there, there's not a lot of clarity about actually what the purpose is of this, these people who are manipulating things behind the scenes, because they have all these young ladies coming to this dance school, and then they're kind of bumping them off and sort of, if they find out the slightest little hint that something shady's going on, they get dispatched, don't they? So
Hmm.
in very creative and bizarre ways. So you kind of do have to wonder what exactly it is that they're trying to do. What is the purpose of it? Mm.
Guess you sort of find out at the end, in a way, but not sure.
In a way, yeah. But it is interesting. It kind of lends itself to that dream quality, though, as well as, I
Hmm.
guess, because it, like Richard said, it doesn't really make, if you think too much about the story, it doesn't really make a lot of sense.
No.
But if you take it just as this sort of visceral experience, and just sort of let yourself sort of follow along with Jessica Harper as she's exploring this world and trying to figure things out, it kind of just has that kind of logic to it.
Yeah,
So
It's got a dream logic, I suppose.
yeah, definitely. And there is, like, Richard, you mentioned, because Argento, prior to this, he made a lot of sort of more standard giallos, which tended to be kind of murder mysteries, didn't he? I mean, his most famous ones are sort of the bird with the crystal plumage, which is one of my personal favorites of his. I think that's a really great film. And what's the other one?
Deep Red.
Deep Red, yeah, the one with David Hemmings and things like that, where they're just sort of, they play a lot with memory, don't they? Because sort of a standard thing in the Giella movies, certainly in Argento's anyway, is that idea that somebody witnesses something, but it's kind of like they're not necessarily conscious of exactly what happened. And then as the film progresses, we have that they sort of start to pick out a little bit more detail out of their memory. And so there is a little element of that in this as well, isn't there? When
Yeah,
when she thinks about with that girl who passed her at the front doorway when she first arrived, and what she was saying, and that sort of plays in later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That bit reminded me a little bit of The Conversation, the
Coppola film. Yeah.
Film, where there's a phrase that's said right at the beginning, which later becomes significant right at the end when it holds the key to the mystery. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's brilliant. Any more thoughts about? Have any of you, like Richard? You're probably much more familiar with Dario Argento. How would you say, in comparison to some of his other stuff, where do you say that this fits in? Do you think?
I would say this is his best. It's sort of his most consistently wonderful film, right? Like I like quite a few of his films, but he can be inconsistent. Like have wonderful stylish moments in a film that doesn't care. It doesn't keep it up for the whole running time, and this one keeps it up for the whole running time.
Yeah.
And there's naturally there are two sequels to this. The first one, he made Inferno.
That's kind of early '80s, wasn't it? It was just a few years after this.
Yeah, it's 1980. It's like there's supposed three films about three. I don't want to spoil it, but the three similar villains, right? And Inferno is the second one, and then he was always supposed to make a third one, and he finally did 30 years later, like 2007.
Wow.
And it's not very good.
That's a shame.
But he generally sort of fell off after the 80s.
Okay.
Output's not great.
Well, I must admit, I didn't even know this was part of a trilogy. I didn't realize, like, I'm familiar with Inferno, but I didn't realize that they were connected. And I haven't seen that third one that you mentioned. It's obviously a much more recent film, and I've never had an opportunity to see it. And like you say, I think my interest of Argento kind of like I wouldn't classify myself as a fan necessarily. There are certain films of his that I quite like, but overall, he's not someone who I necessarily, like I'm not a huge sort of fan, but I know he does have his fans, doesn't he? He has quite a following and of people who really highly regard him and sort of follow all his work and stuff. So,
and he's still active. He made a film last year, I think.
Really?
So, wow. Yeah. So he's been kicking around. I don't think he's made a genuinely good film since the early '90s, but
he's 83 now, apparently.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Well, that's not bad going that he's still working, still plugging away at it. So that's pretty cool, I think. And Dario, if you're out there, come on and do a film swap with us. You're invited anytime. We'd love to have a chat with you. And you can recommend some films to us. That would be pretty cool.
A couple of things I wanted to say is one is that the sound, sort of, or the volume. I kept on having to adjust the volume because my sleeping son, was above me. So 1 minute they're sort of talking, and then the next minute the goblin music starts. It's incredibly loud and spooky. He did come down once when I was watching what was it, Ugetsu. He said, "This sounds really spooky." So I thought he'll definitely think this is spooky. So I turned the volume down, and then I had to turn it up again when there's
And they're
dialogue.
talking. Yeah.
And so I was constantly fiddling with it. And the other thing that was really notable, or the many things, but so when there's a sort of murder, the sort of slicing or stabbing or whatever, I think they must have had gone to the butchers basically and got bits of meat. So, so there's like in the what do you call it, the chien andalou, where they slice through an eyeball, the bull's eyeball.
Yeah.
There's lots of sort of slicing through neck. It looks like a genuine sort of human neck, and various other sort of moments like this.
Yeah. This is a common fixture of sort of Italian sort of murder films and things and horror films of the period. Especially, Richard, you'll know about like the zombie films and things like that. They always see, and what's his name, Fulci, Lucio Fulci. He makes a lot of different types of films, but he seems to revel in making particularly gory and very imaginative ways of dispatching people, and there's always like things going in eyeballs and decapitations and in this one there's a bit where they show the heart pumping, don't they? And
Yeah.
And there's actually a very funny moment in Dolemite that we'll talk about a bit later, where there's a little bit of that as well, isn't there? That's kind of an ode to these these types of things. But yeah, these sort of gory murders and very, very elaborate, sort of like this one at the beginning when that first girl ends up falling through this sort of stained glass window, and it's always very quite funny the way these quite elaborate death scenes. I love the bit in this too. My favorite bit is it's just brilliant. That bit when the girl's trying to escape through the window, and she's kind of standing on. They're kind of showing her at height, and she sees the open door, and she goes, "Okay, there's my chance to escape." And I probably shouldn't say this because I'll be spoiling it for someone who hasn't seen it. But then she sort of jumps, and it turns out for some reason, there's an entire room full of barbed wire down on the floor, and she just lands in it. And,
which she didn't see.
Yeah,
she didn't happen to notice that. But it's just brilliant. Again, that kind of dream quality, like that kind of is something like you'd get in a nightmare, wouldn't you? Where just, no matter what you do, the goalposts keep changing and something really terrible will happen just like that. So it's just brilliant stuff. Just a lot of really fun film to watch, really. And even, I've probably seen this, sort of 5-6 times in my lifetime. So even this morning watching it again, I just really got sucked into it and just really enjoyed it. Actually, I was going to ask you though, Richard, what is there any other Dario Argento films that you would recommend as well to people to check out?
Yeah, I'd say in the 80s, I mentioned Phenomena. I like that one quite a bit, and it's a very early role for Jennifer Connelly.
Oh yeah, that's the one with Jennifer Connelly. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen that before. I might have to check that one out.
Like a lot of his, it was not available it was available in chopped up formats in most countries until relatively recently. I also like Tenebrae a lot, and Opera.
Opera, okay, yeah, that's one I haven't seen either, actually. So that's pretty cool. And I would definitely recommend the Bird with the Crystal Plumage, which is that his first film, or it's definitely one of his first?
It is his first, yeah. The only thing he'd done prior to that is co-write Once Upon a Time in the West with Sergio Leone and Bernardo Bertolucci. Really? That's a trio, yeah.
Extraordinary. That's cool. That's cool. But yeah, that's a really great film, like a really good sort of, kind of murder mystery sort of thriller. And again, it has a very distinct visual style. And I really like that one quite a bit. I rate that film quite highly. I think it's quite that and this Suspiria are kind of the two of his films that I most would recommend to people to check out. They're definitely really cool.
Well, I'd never seen any of his films, and now I think I'll definitely go and see more of them. So, yeah, you sold
Brilliant. Brilliant. And listeners, we think you might want to do that as well. After you listen to the rest of this podcast, of course, we are going to take just a couple of seconds break. And then when we come back, we're going to change gears a little bit and talk about something completely different, which is the completely and utterly unique experience that is Dolemite. So stay right there. We'll be right back in just a second.
Thanks for listening to the Film Swap podcast. You can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Audible, and Google Podcasts, or any of your favorite podcast catchers. If you like this podcast, please consider giving the show a rating or leaving a review. This helps other listeners find the show.
Okay, there we are, and we are back. And we're back on our Grindhouse Greats night. We're having a double feature of films that you might have seen if you lived in, in an urban environment in the 60s and 70s. These are the kind of films you might have seen down in the Grindhouse cinemas. And our second film tonight we're going to be talking about is a 1975 Blaxploitation comedy film, kind of an action comedy kung fu extravaganza of the one of a kind. Well, I guess he made a couple other films after this one, which are quite similar, but this is the one and only Dolemite. So, Richard, this was a film that you put forward for us tonight. So, do you want to just give the listeners a little bit of an introduction to Dolemite?
Sure. As I said earlier, this is like the sort of film debut of Rudy Ray Moore, nightclub comedian who had this character Dolemite in his act, who would mostly recite very profane poems and comedic poems, as he does twice in this film. And he sold very well. Like they made 3 comedy records that had sold really well in the sort of underground market. So he put everything he had into taking Dolemite to the screen. The film's director plays the bad guy in this thing, Willie Green, Derville Martin, who is like a really like a supporting actor who appeared in some Hollywood films, a few Blaxploitation films. And the cinematographer he hired is Joseph von Sternberg's son, which is really quite incredible. But Nicholas Joseph von Sternberg had like done a lot of sort of cheap films at that point, so he was hired. So we get Dolemite on screen. Dolemite is a karate fighting nightclub comedian pimp. I think that's everything. At the start of the film, he's in jail, and he's let out of jail by the warden to investigate drug trafficking in his neighborhood.
Which he was sent to prison for, but they I guess he was set up for it. They imply.
So, bad guy pimp Willie Green is thought to be responsible for all the crime in the neighborhood. So he's come out to sort of investigate and catch Willie Green, which there's no investigation that follows any kind of pattern in the film. He's menaced by a couple of white policemen who are in the employ of the same Mr. Big who's behind Willie Green. Dolemite finds out that all of his prostitutes who are still hanging around waiting for him to come out of jail have been trained in karate. So, army of karate fighting prostitutes up behind him. And
it's good that they used their time constructively while they were waiting around for him, though, really.
So he buys back. He lost his nightclub to Willie. Willie Green while he was in jail. So he buys it back, has a big party there, and everything erupts in a slew of violence when Willie Green shows up at the party. Then there's miscellaneous other things in the film. There is a gun dealing hypocrite priest who I'm not sure exactly how he fits into the plot, except to just show up several times. There is an FBI agent posing as a cop who's investigating too, and sort of comes to Rudy Ray Moore's aid, Dolemite's aid, during the climax. And there's a big bad villain who's like the mayor, who's the least plausible mayor I've ever seen in a film, and has far more nudity than I would ever want that man to have on screen.
Yes.
Quite a lot of nudity, yeah.
There's a lot of nudity, and not always, like you say, it's not always, really, stunning models and things either. It's sort of overweight, sort of middle-aged men, and
I first saw this on VHS, and it's almost a shame to see it. Like, I own the Blu-ray now, and it's nice and properly cropped. This was presented full screen on VHS, and you could see the boom mic in about a quarter of the film. It was like a co-star. I only saw it once now that it's properly cropped. You can see it at the bottom corner of the screen once, but it's not a technically well-made film by any stretch of the imagination. Like, many of the actors are like recruited from acting school that one of the co-stars have been in, so they're range from okay to terrible. And
one of my favorite bits is right at the beginning when they're talking about letting him out, and then his girlfriend, or I don't know if she's his girlfriend, but it's Queenie, isn't her name? And she does this. She's like, "Oh, Dolemite, I'm so happy they're letting you out." And that's just brilliant. Just makes me laugh every time.
Apparently, the hamburger pimp character is just some guy they found on the street. They had trouble casting that part, and they saw this guy walking down the street and said, "This is the guy," and he seems to literally be that guy. Like he seems to be playing himself on screen.
Yeah, you know what he reminded me of? I don't know if you've ever seen that film Manos. Have you ever seen that, The Hands of Fate?
No, I haven't.
Oh, well, there's a guy in that's quite very similar to that. He delivers all his lines in that, sort of like slightly like he's sort of out in outer space. And it's he's a bit like that, isn't he?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd say, like, I'm sort of attacking the technical competence of this film, and it's eminently attackable, but I also think it's sort of it's an attempt to put everything enjoyable on the screen in a concentrated form, right? Yeah. To entertain inner city audiences with a character that they know from records. And I don't know that anyone involved in this film thinks that they're doing a great piece of work. Like, there's this element. I think it's at times Rudy Ray Moore seems to be doing this as a bit of a vanity project, since he's
definitely
in his early 50s by the time he made this, and he's not the stud that he wants to portray himself on film. But
there is very much a little bit of that. He wants to portray himself as as Shaft, doesn't he? It's quite clearly been inspired by Shaft and things like that. That he wants to be this. I'm a big hard man, and I can put everyone in their place, and all the chicks dig me, and everybody, it's kind of there is an element of that, but that kind of again adds to the charm of it, really, isn't it? And all those, it's interesting when you say about the boom mic thing, because a lot of this film, that was quite a famous part of it, that everyone sort of knew it as this sort of the film that was so funny because the boom mic was always in the shots and stuff. But it turns out that the reason for that is because they shot it in that sort of like an open matte format. They just used standard sort of Academy ratio 35 millimeter film. But they knew that when it got shown in cinemas, it would be matted into that 1:8:5 sort of aspect ratio. So they knew that the boom mic wouldn't be in the shots. But when it was originally put on VHS and all that, they just opened the mat up and just transferred it like that because it was the obvious thing to do. But as a result of that, for years, everyone went, "Oh yeah, that's that film that's always got the boom mic in it all the time." And
In the cinemas, people didn't see that.
no. I mean, like Richard said, there is one or two shots where it does
Right.
sort of sneak in for a second,
Yeah,
but generally, but I mean, you could there. I've seen major Hollywood films where that's happened. You see that happen.
yeah,
So, it does happen sometimes because,
yeah.
I mean, I've held boom mics. I've been on film sets and I've held the boom mic, and it's bloody hard work if you're doing it for hours
Mm,
and you're sitting there like, having to hold it up. It's bloody hard work. So, if someone who's sort of not used to doing it, it will invariably that will happen.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that is one of the things about the film. It's very charming, isn't it? Its
Yeah.
flaws are what makes it so uh, enjoyable. And as you said, Richard, it's basically got all the elements in it of a sort of entertaining film. And in a sense, it's almost like a sort of masala, like a Bollywood film, in the sense that you're not going to restrict yourself to a genre. You basically got singing, dancing, kung fu, sex, basically everything in there. And
Yeah.
why the hell not?
And his act, there's a couple scenes where they showcase his act, like which
Yeah,
is doing these poems, these sort of funny, very profanity filled, sort of rhyming stories. I guess is that the best way to describe them?
yeah. Well,
Yeah,
Snoop Dogg has said that without Rudy Ray Moore, there would be no Snoop Dogg, and now he's regarded as one of the originators of rap, I believe. A bit like the Lost Poets in performance. He's one of these sort of like pre-rap rappers almost.
mm,
And but one thing I wanted to mention is that there's this new film on Netflix called "Dolemite Is My Name" by Eddie
mm,
Murphy. And so
yeah.
part of my research, I actually watched it last night.
Oh, brilliant! It's really good, isn't it?
It's a
I mean,
really
I
good.
don't have Netflix anymore, but I watched that before I gave it up, and it's probably like one of the best things Eddie Murphy has done in years. I think.
Absolutely terrific. Yeah, and
Yeah,
one of the things I got from it is that his basically, well, both Dolomite and Dolomite Is My Name are sort of films with a lot of heart.
mm,
Um, and obviously, Eddie Murphy really loved Rudy Ray Moore. He just thought he was, a great guy and embraced his flaws. Because I mean, by the time Eddie Murphy came along, everything was a lot more slick.
mm,
Um, but yeah, it's really. But if you want to know more about Rudy Ray Moore, it's the film is essentially that how the film got made and where his act
yeah,
came from, uh, and what I didn't realize is that they're basically all mates, pretty much,
yeah,
the people that made it, and so the the detective. Jerry Jones, I think he is basically is a screenwriter. Um, that's the FBI agent, and Willie Green, who's the sort of his enemy, is played by Derville Martin, who was in I guess other films. He was sort of had a reputation, and the guy who plays him in Eddie Murphy's film is absolutely terrific. And anyway, it's a very it's definitely a good sort of film worth watching.
In the on the Blu-ray, there is a little sort of documentary, if you will, that talks a bit about the making of the film, and they said that all of his friends and everything that he got together didn't take it seriously at all. They were just all having a laugh, and they didn't think that the film would get finished or that anyone would ever see it, and they
Right.
weren't really taking it very seriously at all.
Okay.
Um, but but then it turned out to be a great success, wasn't it? It went out and it was a huge hit on the on the in the kind of urban cinemas and things like
Yeah.
that. At the time, it was a huge hit and great success. And Rudy Ray Moore made a couple of more films after. I've actually got like a little set here that's from Vinegar Syndrome, and it's got, the films of Rudy Ray Moore, and it's got all like the 4 films that he made in the 70s.
Right.
And it's a lovely little set, and all the films are the same. They're very, very amusing, and
They get increasingly outrageous too, which is like
yeah,
hard to believe if you see this one, that this is almost the most sedate of the bunch.
Is it?
yeah. In a sense, it is. And it does. When you're talking about Dolomite is my name, like, because it really kind of reminded me a bit. It has that same kind of vibe of Ed Wood, doesn't it? Who's someone who's quite
Yes.
famous for making bad films, and but the Tim Burton film about him is wonderful because it is very much like a celebration of someone just doing something, from their heart and out of
Yeah.
passion, and and about bringing people together and doing something creative to express yourself in that way. And
Absolutely.
they weren't sort of good at it, but they um, created things that have ended up standing the test of time. Maybe not for the reasons that people, maybe they would have liked, but you know.
Yeah.
Both films have the same screenwriters, Ed Wood and the My Name Is Dolemite.
All right, okay, I didn't know
Hey,
that. Well, that explains a
how
lot then.
extraordinary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they do have very much the same vibe of that sort of celebrating, these people who sort of just DIY did it themselves and did something. And I like both films quite a lot. So that's interesting. I didn't realize they were written by the same person.
Jerry Jones.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't remember the other guy's name, but Larry Kazarewski wrote both My Name Is Dolemite
Oh,
Ed
sorry,
Wood,
my name is. Oh, okay, okay.
and Ed Wood.
I see. Yeah.
You know what? I'll mention too another film that recently came out. There is a label in America called Deaf Crocodile. I'm sure, Richard, you might be familiar with them, and they've been kind of restoring and releasing a lot of films from sort of Eastern Europe and different sort of genre films and animated films and stuff. And they've been releasing a lot of really, really, really interesting things. And one of the things that they've put out just quite recently is very similar to Dolomite. It's called Solomon King, and it is another sort of Blaxploitation film that was made under quite similar circumstances. It was made by a guy who basically ran a clothing store in, I think it's Chicago, but don't. I'm sorry if I'm, because I'm just going off the top of my head here, so I might be misremembering. But he basically just scraped some money together, got all his mates together, and made a film just like this, like an action sort of Shaft-esque kind of action adventure film out on the mean streets there with pimps and crooked cops and all that kind of stuff. And it's very similar kind of vibe to Dolomite, although it's not really, I think, meant as a comedy. But it's another film. I think if people, if they enjoy Dolomite and things like that, they might want to go and check that out because that's quite an interesting little piece of archival sort of rescuing that deaf crocodile, and labels like Vinegar Syndrome are great. They're just going and rescuing all these really obscure sort of genre films and forgotten things, and just sort of trying to preserve them for future generations. So they're doing a lot of really good work,
Good stuff.
saving all these, going through the trash and saving stuff that
Yeah.
people have thrown away, basically. So
That actually reminds me of what I was going to say. So there's actually two connections with Suspiria. Firstly, Dolomite is a mountain range in Italy, I believe, and
okay.
more relevant is that sort of element of horror, which is in the sort of final fight in
Mm.
Dolemite, is where basically the sort of the baddie Willie Green gets shot or stabbed or whatever, and his sort of guts come out. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, Dolomite gives him like one of his karate sort of stabbing karate moves. And then, like, there's sort of all this. They must have just put some sort of chopped liver on his, thing to make it look like his intestines were coming out. And that was really funny because it reminded me there's a lot of sort of kind of kung fu So, films like that. Like, it reminds me of one of those Bruceploitation things I watched quite recently with Bruce Lie, Bruce Li,
Oh,
and
right.
there's a film of his that at the end they're having the big showdown with the villain, and then he gouges his eyes out, and then they have this sort of, this big gory shot of the guy's all eyeballs dropping out of his head, and it's kind of quite similar to that sort of thing. So I think Dolemite was probably, because this is around the same time when we were in the kind of kung fu boom, weren't we, as well? And a lot of martial arts films were being imported over and dubbed in and then shown
Yeah.
in grindhouses and things like that. So I'm sure Rudy Ray Moore saw a couple of those and was inspired by them. Mm.
Yeah, it because the martial arts films in the U.S. like really only played like those really inner city theaters. It is a huge like African American audience for them, and you see these martial arts elements in Blaxploitation films all the time. Even though,
Yeah.
like, I was relatively surprised that the credits on this film seemed to suggest like there was some competent martial artists involved in this film
Yeah.
because
Well,
they don't know how
Chuck
to shoot.
Norris's name is in the credits, isn't it? They say special thanks to the Chuck Norris Karate School.
Oh, yes,
So
that's true. That is true. Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah. Some of the action near the end of this film is like virtually incoherent. In that big fight where people
yeah.
are fighting in the nightclub, I could not for the life of me tell who's on what side in any particular. And
Yeah, well, it would be a bit like that though in real life, wouldn't it?
yeah,
And like if
That's
all these guys were in this big club and a big huge brawl broke out, you wouldn't necessarily know who's on whose side, would you? So it had that kind of, right in there kind of feel to it. I'm
the,
I'm not convinced that Rudy Ray Moore had a lot of actual martial arts training though.
no.
no, no.
Some of those scenes are great when he kicks and you could see like that there's like about this much space between him and the guy he kicks, but the guy still goes, ah, you know.
In the big like thwarted assassination attempt at the end of the film, I think they literally just didn't shoot some things because it just like it's one of the most abrupt cuts I've ever seen. I don't know what happened to that.
Yeah. And there's lots of great bits when they cut to his face, like when he's, either when he's in a fight scene, or conversely when he's like making love to one of his harem of sexy chicks there, and they just do these close-ups of his face going like they're just very funny. It's just there's loads and loads of moments like that throughout the film that just make you laugh out loud.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, yeah. And unfortunately, we can't sort of say a lot of the lines on here because we don't want to have coarse language in the show. But the film is obviously riddled with,
A lot of expletives.
swearing.
A lot of
Yes.
expletives. Yeah.
Um, but it's brilliant fun. It's always great fun to watch this. I actually the first time I saw this film was in the cinema.
Really?
Oddly enough, they screened it in I can't remember the name of it, but in Toronto there was one of these like sort of repertory cinemas. It was the same one, I think, on a previous episode recently. I mentioned that I saw Singing in the Rain there. They showed
Yeah.
a double bill of Wizard of Oz and Singing in the Rain. And this was the same place that they had like a late night screening. It started at like 11 o'clock or something like that. And they showed Dolemite. And I went with a couple of friends one night and watched it. And that was the first time I'd seen it, actually.
Wow.
So I actually saw this in a cinema, and it was a very beat up print. It was very scratchy and
Brilliant.
sort of had frames missing and sort of was jumpy and everything. But um, it was a really good night, really really entertaining, fun evening,
That's how you
very
want to see it.
free and yeah, yeah,
One of the other nice things about it is exactly an hour and a half long,
yeah,
which is my perfect length for a film.
yeah. I know, me too. Because I have trouble sort of staying up late now and watching things. So if they're too long, I actually split things up now. I used to be very dogmatic about watching things and like, sort of, I got to sit and watch the whole thing, and I don't want interruptions, and I don't want any noise. But nowadays, I'm quite happy to split things up over a couple of nights or whatever, just so that I can actually keep my eyes open for the whole thing and stuff. So, yeah.
Same with me.
Well, did we have anything else we wanted to talk about Dolemite at all?
I think you can gesture at two other connections between it and Suspiria. One, this movie also features incredible wallpaper.
Yes, and there's a lot of red in it, isn't there?
Yeah. And I also don't think you could really explain the plot of what the bad guys are up to in this one either.
No. They're just dastardly. They're just up to I guess they're like they're smuggling drugs and I don't know, guns, and I don't know. Again, I don't think you want to overthink the plot too much, because I think you're going down a rabbit hole there that for no reason. I think this is a film you just got to let kind of wash over you. Just let it happen.
One of my favourite bits is when they're on they're trying to hunt down the drugs, and they go to the docks and they find a packet of cocaine in a fish. I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, but that doesn't really go anywhere though either, does it? He just sort of he finds that, and then they just sort of move on. Richard, do you have any other favorite moments? Is there one minute that always gets you?
Right near the end, when the mayor's henchmen are trying to drug the FBI agent, and they say, "You're going to drug me and make me look like I drowned in the pool." And I'm thinking, but it's the mayor's pool. Surely you'd be in even worse trouble if you had
it wouldn't be a well thought out plan at all, would it? Well, I even like just that bit at the beginning. I mean, I already mentioned about the woman crying, Queenie crying at the beginning, but I love that conversation with the warden. Just because the whole concept of the thing is like, you've been convicted of doing running drugs or selling drugs or whatever, but Queenie came and explained to us that it wasn't really you. So we're going to let you out so you can go and investigate your own crime that you've already been convicted of.
And then he kind of goes letting him out.
Yeah, exactly. And then once he gets let out, they're still harassing him because the police are harassing him. And you think, well, surely they know that he's been released to investigate this thing, but they're still harassing him. And the warden goes, I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to be dangerous, but I know you can take it. You can roll with the punches, and then he gives this little. It sounds like he's reading off the script of a trailer. So it's brilliant. It's brilliant stuff. Very, 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 very funny.
Another thing in it is that there's a character, the mayor, who's this corrupt sort of mayor, one of the bad guys, is Mayor Daley. And who was, I think, named after Richard J. Daley, the mayor of Chicago, who I'm looking here now in the Chicago Sun-Times, I think the main newspaper in Chicago, would become the most powerful and racially divisive mayor in city history. So basically, they're making a little point there. He was still mayor at this stage. He was mayor until 1976, I think. And this film was made a couple of years before then. And basically they're making this point about this sort of very unpleasant racist mayor of Chicago, which is a nice little sort of aside as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great thing about these kind of films, because they are kind of made right at the street level, and they're kind of talking about the concerns that people would have had at the time, and sort of, there is still expressing some issues there, about poverty and the kind of the things that people were going through at the time, in a sense, and
police corruption.
Yeah, police corruption and the inequalities and things, and also we've talked before about how these films are a great time capsule because they were actually shot on location. They very much capture these cities and these places at a specific point in time. So they are a little bit of a time capsule as well in terms of, just showing real places,
Yeah.
even though what's going on is fictional and things. So,
Less so with Suspiria, because that's in a sort of
well, yes,
dream world.
yes,
Although there is the airport and a few other bits, but
yeah, yeah, and that square where the blind, the man with the dog,
that's true.
that bit there, that's quite a famous building, isn't it? That whole square where he's in.
Yeah.
So I can't remember the name of it, but that's quite a sort of a famous landmark, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So we usually, at the end of the show, we usually just mention about how we saw the pictures in case anyone wants to go and check them out. Obviously, this is subject to change. Obviously, if people are listening to this at some point in the future, things might be different. But Jonathan, where did you watch Suspiria? First
Suspiria,
time.
I watched on Amazon Prime, which through the BFI player sort of plugin, as it were,
Hmm.
and which was also, I think, where I watched Dolemite. In fact, Amazon Prime has a number of Rudy Ray Moore films, including
Hmm.
Dolemite. And then, as a matter of fact, I watched Dolemite is My Name on Netflix because I think that's pretty much the only place you can watch it.
Yeah, I think it's an actual Netflix film, isn't it? So
Yeah,
they probably is just only on Netflix, but that might get a physical release of some kind at some point because I think it's quite a good film. So
it's a great film.
yeah. So Richard, you're in Canada, so I don't know. We often talk about that because here in the UK, the streaming situation is pretty dire,
Not as
and we're always complaining about it. At least I am. Um, but I know you're like me. You're quite an avid physical media collector. I think you have quite an extensive collection as well. So, how did you watch the films tonight?
Suspiria is one I don't own for some reason, but it was really good timing because Suspiria is currently on the Criterion channel.
Oh, brilliant!
So that's
Okay.
where I watched that. I think when it's not on the Criterion channel, I think it's been on like available on Hoopla, which is a free streaming service connected with libraries in North America. And
Okay,
it's been on there for years, I know. So it's probably
right.
there if it's no longer on the Criterion channel by next month, for example. With
Oh,
Dolomite, I own that Vinegar Syndrome Blu-ray. So
yeah.
Uh,
Did you have the set, or do you
I just have
you just have
Dolomite.
Dolomite?
I think because I owned it on DVD and I upgraded that one at some point.
Oh, okay. But the other films, like you say, are quite fun as well. So I'll show this again to people. This is from a company called Vinegar Syndrome, which is based in the United States. And they've got this little set, the films of Rudy Ray Moore. But I'm pretty certain that each of the films is available individually as well. So if you didn't want to buy the whole set, you can get just Dolomite or any of the other films separately. And Suspiria, I watched on this very beautiful 4K Blu-ray that's available. This is the U.S. import from Synops Films. They did a restoration, and it is absolutely stunning. As a matter of fact, I think this was the first 4K disc that I got. And after this, I ended up getting loads more because it is pretty stunning. And um, but I think there is a UK. I can't remember who it is, but I think there is a UK label that have also released it over here. But I don't. I think that came out a bit recently, which is why I ended up getting that because that came out quite a bit before. Um, so anyway, so for people who want it on physical media, there are some good quality Blu-rays out there to watch the films on. I don't know, Richard. Do you know if Dolomite's on any streaming service over there or anything? Is that
I honestly didn't look because I owned it, right? So
yeah?
yeah,
No, I'm the same. If I have it on the shelf, I don't bother looking. But it is in it because Jonathan. And is it fair to say, Jonathan, you're not really like much of a
not,
collector?
not
I think
quite as
you have some stuff, don't you?
but
But
not yeah, not as much.
yeah,
But yeah, you can get it. There is a Blu-ray over here, and I think it is from. I'm trying to see. where it's from now. I think it's Anise Moon. Is that? Have you heard of that? Anise.
No. But there are a lot of little small boutique labels that are cropping up all the time. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it gets complicated anyway. But I mean, all you need to do is just do a search on Google or Amazon or something. And I'm sure, you can find if it's something that you're in the market for.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, well, I guess unless, guys, there was anything else you wanted to add about the films, I think we might wrap it up there. Richard, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been great talking to you about this stuff, and we hope you'll come back again. Maybe we'll do another follow-up Grindhouse episode or talk about something else. And because we know you're quite knowledgeable, and like I say, you have a very large collection as well and stuff. So I know you've always got lots of interesting stuff to talk about. So if you come back and see us again sometime.
Sure, no problem. It's been fun.
Oh, great. And is there anything you wanted to plug or anything you want to talk about while we're on here?
I never do anything, so except watch movies. I rarely have anything to plug. I'm just hanging out on social media and watching movies.
Well, that's cool. Well, you're always a good follow on Facebook. I often have said that literally because Facebook, I don't really Facebook or whatever you want to call it very much anymore. But when I look at it, quite literally, you are almost like all that comes up in my feed. So I literally just see posts from Richard about film, and it's great stuff because he's always posting about films he's watching or his observations about stuff, or you put like little funny pictures or things that you see and you just sort of put them up there for a laugh and stuff. So you're a good follow on Facebook, and you always come up. You basically are my Facebook feed. Maybe occasionally like sort of some of the Criterion Cast stuff comes up as well. But basically, that's it. If I open Facebook, Richard Doyle's stuff comes up. So people go out and find him on Facebook because he's got a good feed. It's good stuff. So, all right. Well, thanks again, Richard, for coming, and Jonathan. Always a pleasure talking to you. Yeah. And we'll be back, listeners, in a couple of weeks. So we got a couple other guests lined up coming up in the next little while, and lots of cool stuff coming. And as I said before, keep an eye on our website and on our social media stuff, because there are some plans afoot, and they are coming very soon. We've got some things in the offing, and we're nearly ready. If I ever get 5 or 10 minutes to finish some stuff, they'll be coming. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, wherever you are out there, take care of yourself and watch lots of cool films, and drop us a line and let us know about them, because we'd love to hear from you. So on that note, folks, we will see you soon.
Bye.
Oh, the things these nerdy middle-aged men get up to.